Every morning, she rode her old bicycle to the big company building. Her clothes were simple, her shoes were worn, and everyone laughed at her. The security guards whispered jokes, the office workers pointed fingers, and even the cleaners felt sorry for her. But what they didn't know was about to shock them all. Who really was this quiet girl on the bicycle? What secret was she hiding behind her humble appearance? Sit back and find out as we dive into this powerful story that will change how you see people forever.
In the heart of Lagos stood a massive glass building called Phoenix Corporate Tower. It reached high into the sky like a giant mirror. Every morning, expensive cars lined up outside, Mercedes, BMW, Range Rover, all shining under the morning sun. Men in sharp suits and women in designer clothes stepped out, their heels clicking on the marble floor as they walked into the building. But every morning, at exactly 7:30 a.m., something different happened. A young woman rode up on an old bicycle. The bicycle was red, but the paint was faded. The chain made a squeaking sound. Her clothes were clean but simple, a plain blue dress and black shoes that had seen better days. She would park her bicycle near the security post, lock it with a small padlock, and walk quietly into the building. The security guards had names for her. Bicycle Girl, they called her. Sometimes they would laugh and say, "Here comes our village champion." The woman never responded. She just smiled softly and walked past them. Her name was Grace, but nobody at the office knew that. Nobody cared to ask. Grace worked on the third floor in the accounts department. She sat at a small desk in the corner, away from everyone else. Her job was to input data into the computer and file documents. She did her work quietly, never complaining, never asking for help. When lunchtime came, she would eat her homemade sandwich while others went to expensive restaurants. When work ended, she would pack her things, walk to her bicycle, and ride home.
The other employees couldn't understand Grace. In a building where image was everything, she stood out like a sore thumb. During lunch breaks, they would gather around the window and watch her eat her simple meal. "Look at her," said Sandra, one of the marketing executives. "In this day and age, who still rides a bicycle to work?" The others laughed. "Maybe she can't afford a car," said James from HR. "Or maybe she doesn't even have a license," added another voice. They found it entertaining to watch Grace through the window as she sat alone. The mockery got worse every day. When Grace walked past the reception area, the receptionists would whisper among themselves. "Poor thing," they would say loud enough for her to hear. "She probably lives in one of those small rooms in the slums." Grace would keep walking, her face calm, her steps steady. She never showed that their words hurt her. Even the cleaners felt sorry for her. "Sister," one of them said to Grace one evening, "why don't you take the bus? It's not that expensive." Grace smiled and shook her head. "I like my bicycle," she said softly. "It keeps me healthy." The cleaner looked confused. In Lagos, only poor people rode bicycles to work. Rich people drove cars. It was that simple. But Grace had a secret so big that if these people knew, they would fall to their knees in shock. She wasn't poor. She wasn't struggling. She was actually the wife of the man who owned the entire building. But nobody knew this, not even her husband's employees. And that was exactly how she wanted it.
On the 20th floor of Phoenix Corporate Tower sat the most powerful office in the building. Behind a massive mahogany desk sat David Adebayo, the CEO and owner of Phoenix Group. He was only 35 years old, but he had built an empire. His companies were worth billions of naira. He was featured on magazine covers and invited to government functions. David was handsome and successful, but he was also very private. Nobody knew much about his personal life. The employees whispered that he was single, that he was too busy for relationships, that he was married to his work. Some of the female employees dreamed of catching his attention. They would dress up extra nicely, hoping to see him in the elevator. What they didn't know was that David was married, very married, and very much in love with his wife. But they had agreed to keep their marriage secret from the business world. There were good reasons for this. David's company dealt with many powerful people who might try to use his wife to get to him. There were also competitors who might target her to hurt his business. Every morning, David would arrive at the office in his black Mercedes. He would take his private elevator straight to the 20th floor. He would spend his day in meetings, making decisions that affected thousands of people. But his favorite part of the day was around 7:30 a.m., when he would look out of his office window and see a familiar red bicycle parking near the security post. His heart would skip a beat every time he saw Grace lock her bicycle and walk into the building. She looked so beautiful in her simple clothes. She looked so peaceful on her old bicycle. While everyone else was rushing and honking in traffic, his wife was gliding calmly on two wheels, enjoying the morning breeze. David smiled every time he thought about it.
After work, Grace would unlock her bicycle and ride through the busy streets of Lagos. But she wasn't going to a small room in the slums like everyone thought. She was going to one of the most beautiful houses in Ikoyi, one of Lagos's most expensive neighborhoods. The house was huge and white, with a swimming pool and a garden full of flowers. There were 3 cars in the garage, a BMW, a Mercedes, and a small Toyota that Grace sometimes drove when she didn't feel like cycling. But Grace preferred her bicycle. It reminded her of her childhood in the village, when life was simple and happiness didn't depend on material things. Grace would park her bicycle in the garage next to the expensive cars. It looked funny there, this old, faded bicycle next to these shining machines. But Grace loved the contrast. It reminded her never to forget where she came from. Inside the house, Grace would change from her simple work clothes into comfortable home clothes. She would cook dinner and wait for David to come home. When he arrived, usually around 8 p.m., he would find her in the kitchen, humming softly as she stirred the soup. "How was your day, my love?" David would ask, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "It was good," Grace would reply, leaning into his embrace. "And yours?" David would tell her about his meetings, his deals, his challenges, and Grace would listen, offering advice when he needed it. She was not just his wife. She was his closest friend and most trusted advisor. But they never talked about the mockery Grace faced at work. David didn't know how his employees treated his wife, and Grace never told him. She didn't want to cause trouble for anyone. She was content to live her double life, being Grace the bicycle girl during the day and Mrs. Adebayo at night.
3 months into Grace's job at Phoenix Corporate, the mockery reached a new level. It started on a Monday morning when Grace arrived at work as usual on a bicycle. But this time, a group of employees had gathered near the security post, phones in their hands. "There she is," shouted Sandra from marketing. "Let's take a video." They started recording as Grace parked her bicycle. "Look at this in 2024, Sandra said to the camera. "Some people still ride bicycles to work at a multinational company. Can you imagine?" The others laughed loudly. Grace heard everything. She saw the phones pointed at her, but she just smiled calmly, locked her bicycle, and walked into the building. Her hands were steady. Her steps were sure. But inside, her heart was beating fast. She had never been recorded before. She wondered if the video would end up on social media. By lunchtime, the video was already making rounds in the office WhatsApp groups. People who had never noticed Grace before were now watching the video and laughing. "Bicycle Girl has gone viral," someone said. "She's famous now." The comments were harsh. "This is embarrassing. How can someone be so backward? Doesn't she have any shame?"
Grace sat at her desk, trying to focus on her work. But she could hear the whispers around her. She could see people pointing at her screen, showing each other the video. Some people were even taking secret photos of her at her desk. Grace felt like she was in a fishbowl, with everyone watching her every move. That evening, as Grace unlocked her bicycle to go home, the security guard called out to her, "Madame, you don't become celebrity, yo. Your video don't reach social media." Grace looked at him. "What video?" she asked, though she already knew. The guard showed her his phone. There she was, parking her bicycle, while voices in the background mocked her. The video had over 1,000 views already.
That night, David noticed that Grace was quieter than usual. She cooked dinner as always, but she didn't hum her usual songs. When he asked about her day, she just said it was fine and changed the subject quickly. David had been married to Grace for 3 years. He knew her moods, her habits, her little signs. Something was wrong, but he couldn't figure out what. Grace was usually so cheerful, so positive, but tonight she seemed distant. "Grace," David said as they sat down for dinner, "are you sure everything is okay?" Grace looked up and smiled. "Yes, my love. I'm just tired." But David wasn't convinced. He had built a business empire by reading people, by noticing details that others missed. And right now, every detail told him that his wife was troubled. After dinner, David sat in his study, but he couldn't concentrate on his work. He kept thinking about Grace's sad eyes, her forced smile. He picked up his phone and called his head of security at the office. "Johnson," he said, "I want you to keep an eye on things at the office. Make sure all employees are treating each other with respect." Johnson was confused. "Sir, is there a problem?" David paused. He couldn't tell Johnson that he was worried about his wife without revealing their secret. "Just make sure the work environment is professional," David said. "Report to me if you notice any bullying or harassment." The next morning, David arrived at the office earlier than usual. He stood by his window, watching the street below. At exactly 7:30 a.m., he saw the familiar red bicycle. But this time, he noticed something else. A group of employees was standing near the entrance, pointing and laughing as Grace parked her bicycle. David's jaw tightened. His hands formed fists. For the first time, he was seeing how his employees treated his wife. And he didn't like what he saw. Not one bit. David spent the morning thinking about what he had witnessed. He couldn't focus on his meetings. All he could see in his mind was Grace parking her bicycle while people pointed and laughed. He felt angry, but he also felt helpless. He couldn't defend his wife without revealing their secret. After lunch, David called his assistant. "Bring me the personnel file for Grace Okoro in accounts," he said. His assistant looked surprised. Grace was a junior employee. Why would the CEO want her file? But she didn't ask questions. She brought the file within minutes. David opened the file and looked at his wife's photo. Even in the simple ID photo, she looked beautiful and dignified. He read through her work records. Perfect attendance, no complaints, excellent performance reviews. Grace was a model employee, yet she was being treated like an outcast. David made a decision. He picked up his phone and called the head of HR. "I want a full report on workplace culture," he said. "I want to know if there are any issues with employee treatment, bullying, or harassment, and I want it by tomorrow." The HR head was nervous. "Sir, has someone complained?" David's voice was cold. "Just do the investigation. Talk to employees. Find out how people treat each other. I want names, incidents, everything." That evening, David waited until Grace was asleep before he opened his laptop. He searched for Phoenix Corporate on social media, looking for any mention of his company. What he found made his blood boil. There was the video of Grace parking her bicycle with hundreds of mean comments underneath. "This is what poverty looks like. Someone should start a GoFundMe for her. How can a company allow this kind of image?" The comments went on and on. David's hands shook as he read them. These strangers were insulting his wife, his precious Grace, and they didn't even know her. But what hurt him most were the comments from his own employees. He recognized some of the names from his company directory. His own staff were publicly humiliating his wife on social media. David closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time, planning what he would do next.
The next morning, David's HR head knocked on his office door with a thick folder. "Sir, you asked for a report on workplace culture," she said nervously. David took the folder and opened it. What he read made him sick to his stomach. The report was full of testimonies from employees about how they treated Grace. Some were proud of their behavior. "Everyone knows about Bicycle Girl," one employee had said. "She's like our office mascot. We all have stories about her." Another employee said, "It's not bullying, we're just having fun. She doesn't seem to mind." But the worst part was the video evidence. The HR team had found multiple videos of Grace on employees' phones. Videos of her parking her bicycle, videos of her eating alone, videos of her walking through the office. His employees had been documenting his wife's daily life like she was some kind of entertainment. David stood up from his desk and walked to the window. Down below, he could see Grace's red bicycle parked in its usual spot. She was inside the building now, probably sitting at her small desk, doing her work quietly while people whispered about her. David felt a rage he had never felt before. He picked up his phone and made a call. "Johnson, I want all employees to gather in the main conference hall at 3 p.m. today. Everyone, no exceptions." Johnson was confused. "Sir, all employees? That's over 200 people." David's voice was steel. "All of them. Tell them the CEO has an important announcement." By 3 p.m., the main conference hall was packed. Employees filled every seat and lined the walls. There was excitement in the air. The CEO rarely addressed all employees at once. Something big was happening. Sandra from marketing whispered to her friend, "Maybe he's giving us a bonus." Others speculated about company expansions or new policies. At exactly 3 p.m., David walked into the conference hall. But he wasn't alone. Walking beside him, wearing a beautiful blue dress and elegant jewelry, was Grace. But she looked different. Her hair was styled professionally. Her makeup was perfect. She looked like what she really was, the wife of a billionaire CEO. The room went completely silent. You could hear a pin drop. People stared at Grace in shock. Was this the same woman who rode a bicycle to work? Was this the same person they had been mocking for months? David's voice became harder. "I have seen the videos you made of my wife. I have read the cruel comments you posted online. I have documentation of every instance of harassment and bullying." He paused and looked around the room. "Effective immediately, anyone who participated in mocking my wife will face disciplinary action." The HR head stood up with a folder. "We have identified 15 employees who actively participated in harassment," she announced. "They will receive written warnings and mandatory sensitivity training. Anyone who posted videos or comments online will have their social media accounts reported and will face legal consequences." But then Grace stepped forward again. "Wait," she said softly. "I want to say something." She looked out at the terrified faces in the audience. "I forgive all of you," she said. The room gasped. "I forgive you because I understand that you didn't know who I was, but I hope you will learn from this experience." Grace's voice became stronger. "The lesson is not about who I am married to. The lesson is about treating every person with dignity and respect, regardless of how they look or what they own. That cleaner who mops your office floor deserves the same respect as your manager. That security guard at the gate deserves the same kindness as your colleague. David looked at his wife with admiration. Even after everything they had put her through, she was choosing forgiveness over revenge. This was why he loved her so much. This was why he had married her. However, David said, forgiveness doesn't mean there are no consequences. Going forward, any employee caught bullying, harassing, or disrespecting another employee will be terminated immediately. We will create a work environment where everyone is treated with dignity. Grace smiled at the audience. I will continue working in the accounts department, she said. Not because I have to, but because I choose to. And I hope that from now on you will see me as Grace, your colleague, not as the CEO's wife or as Bicycle Girl, but as a human being worthy of respect. The conference ended with thunderous applause, but it wasn't the polite clapping of a corporate meeting. It was the genuine applause of people who had learned a life-changing lesson. 6 months later, Grace still rode her bicycle to work, but now, instead of mockery, she received warm greetings. Good morning, Grace, the security guards would say with genuine smiles. Her colleagues and accounts treated her as a valued team member. And sometimes, new employees who didn't know her story would ask, "Who is that woman on the bicycle?" The answer would always be, "That's Grace. She's amazing." The red bicycle still squeaked a little, and the paint was still faded, but now it was a symbol of something beautiful. The courage to be yourself in a world that judges by appearances, and the power of treating every person you meet with dignity and respect.